Australia, Chilean, Albert, and actually, trace back the. You really want to hear passport back.
Because it really comes to life.
This one smells good. Careful, not too close to the open.
This is CBC Winnipeg News.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. The University of Winnipeg is dealing with the aftermath of a cyber attack that could take weeks to fix. Faculty and students have been scrambling since Sunday. It's nearly exam time. Some students can't access their email. Others can't see their class notes online. The CBC's Rosanna Hempel brings us the latest.
I just came out of a virtual town hall at the University of Winnipeg on the cyber attack. 1,000 people logged on and there were hundreds of questions. University officials say the breach means the school year will have to be a week longer. Exams are coming up, so we spoke with students earlier today to see how they're feeling.
We can't access our online stuff, so we kind of are left in the dark, and it's right before finals too.
Our finances and our transcript and our personal information could be very, very vulnerable at this time, especially if it is an attack. So yeah, 100%, I've been very, very worried.
The university says it discovered the cyber incident Sunday and immediately shut down a few services to secure its network. Classes were canceled Monday, but as of Wednesday, many services, including Nexus, are still down.
It's been really difficult to access our notes. I know for my classes, I haven't been able to, access that because everything is in our Nexus page. So it's really, really difficult. And especially at this time, it's near the end of the year.
Assistant Professor Félix Mathieu says the cyber incident caught everyone off guard.
As we know, exams are coming up and assignments are due soon. This is the most stressful aspect because you want students to have access to their pedagogical material, but they don't necessarily have access to their email either.
University officials don't think personal information was compromised, but they are still looking into it. They're working with cyber security companies to get the most important services back online. They hope that'll happen by next week, but they need to make sure it's safe first and that another breach doesn't happen. Rosanna Hempel, CBC News, Winnipeg.
The province says the supply of gas, diesel, and jet fuel coming into Winnipeg is starting to stabilize. That's been a concern since Imperial Oil shut down its fuel pipeline last week, saying a stretch under the Red River needs to be replaced. Imperial Oil says it is preparing the worksite at St. Adolphe to begin horizontal drilling. The province says upgrades to further increase the fuel supply at Winnipeg's fuel terminal are also underway, and fuel's coming into the city via rail and truck. The province says it is regularly meeting with suppliers to check on fuel supply levels, price impacts, and distribution to retailers. There are growing calls for the province to take drastic action and increase its supply of affordable rental units in Manitoba. And as CBC's Josh Crabb reports, there's a push for the provincial government to build up its stock of social housing.
With Provincial Budget Day fast approaching, advocates are calling on the Manitoba government to make public housing units like this a priority. It's an issue that's top of mind for tenant Paula Kierstead. She can afford her monthly rent of $900 in a former nonprofit apartment complex, but Kierstead doesn't have much room in her budget for any possible rent increases.
Good grief, there's only so much you can afford for your apartment, and then when you start adding the inflation of food, people are really struggling.
The 287-unit building she lives in was sold last year to a private company. It's the opposite of what housing advocates like Shauna McKinnon want to see. She's with the Right to Housing Coalition. It's calling on the province to expand its supply of housing with rents totaling no more than 30% of household income, starting with a commitment of 1,000 units in the April 2nd budget.
So we need to do that through new builds, which takes a while, but it is something that we need to start doing through acquisition of existing buildings and repairing them, retrofitting them into social housing.
Right to Housing also says funding is needed to make sure tenants have access to support workers, and they say a capital maintenance fund and operating subsidy is needed to make sure existing units don't fall into disrepair. Housing Minister Bernadette Smith wouldn't give exact details, but hinted at support in the upcoming budget for adding and maintaining public housing.
We will continue to invest in what we have, support nonprofits, and build social and affordable housing.
McKinnon says it has to go further than subsidies for people who can't find or afford housing to rent in the private market. That's what's keeping Kierstead's rent from rising right now, but after the provincial subsidy ends, she's not sure what to expect.
So I'm nervous. I'm very nervous.
She says more public housing would give people who live on a low income more options to find a place to call home. Josh Crabb, CBC News, Winnipeg.
And of course, all this means it's getting harder for people with mental health or addiction issues to find low barrier housing. Last week, we reported that the Adanac apartment building on Sargent Avenue is up for sale. Now, as CBC's Cameron McLean tells us, it's not the only building in the West End in receivership.
City Councillor Cindy Gilroy knows the Adanac apartments well. A frequent source of calls to firefighters and police, the city ordered it vacated last August. Now it's listed for sale.
I think what the community will be happy because there's so many problems coming out of the buildings, but in reality it was a home for many people as well.
The Adanac isn't the only apartment building in this neighborhood that's been put into receivership. At least 2 other properties within a couple blocks of here, linked to the same owners, have been listed for sale.
This apartment building on Furby Street was seized in March of last year. Same with this building over on Yonge Street. All 3 properties belong to Patrick Penner or his wife, Karen Harper Penner. CBC News tried to contact the Penners, but did not receive a response. The buildings were used by outreach groups to house people from encampments. Gilroy worries their sale could make that harder.
Every time that we do lose housing stock that we hard to house people, it is a fear of mine.
Michelle Wesley is the outreach coordinator with St. Boniface Street Links. She has worked frequently with the Penners to house people.
The low barrier housing that is provided through the Penners is extremely important, and them closing down is actually putting the housing in a really tough position.
Executive Director Marion Willis says landlords need to be supported to help keep people housed.
It's actual services in the building to prevent the fires and to prevent the violence and the drug use and so on, so that people can actually stabilize.
Gilroy hopes the provincial government will step in to help community groups buy the buildings and turn them into supportive housing.
What I would like to see is the province look at licensing buildings.
She hopes that can keep low barrier housing like this available for those who need it. Cameron McLean, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Community leaders in Winnipeg are pressuring the province to give them more control over the development of their neighbourhoods. They want a significant increase in funding for Indigenous centres, women's centres and neighbourhood groups. Michelle Wickerink is with the Spence Neighbourhood Association. Her group helps dozens of young people get good jobs each year. She says the association offers ongoing support so youth stay employed. But she says they don't have enough funding to help all the young people who are willing to work.
After 20 years in existence, the success of this program has been proven time and time again. It is life-changing, and yet the only funding we've been able to secure for the upcoming year is through our NRC grant and some short-term funding from foundations.
The group wants the province to be an investor while the communities lead and plan. A man accused of helping smuggle an Indian family of 4 across the U.S.-Canada border into Minnesota has pleaded not guilty. 28-year-old Harsh Kumar Patel entered his plea during a teleconference in Duluth. The family of 4 froze to death 2 years ago. Police say Patel hired a Florida man to drive the family and a group of other Indian citizens to the border. 49-year-old Stephen Shan pleaded not guilty as well. Shan remains free on his own recognizance. Patel is still in federal custody. A Manitoba judge has thrown out the confession of a woman with a cognitive disability who's charged with manslaughter in the death of her 2-year-old stepson. CBC's Brittany Greenslade has more.
A provincial court judge is criticizing tactics used by police in the interrogation of a woman with intellectual disabilities and say her confession is being tossed out because of it. In a February provincial court ruling, a judge says the confession only came after police put the woman through hours of, quote, psychological pummeling and prolonged and aggressive questioning, where she had an emotional breakdown. The judge says he has reasonable doubt that her confession was actually voluntary. The woman, who cannot be named due to a court order, was arrested in 2020 after her 2-year-old stepson died in her care. The judge says officers showed her gruesome photos of the dead child to shock and potentially provoke a confession during the 11-hour interrogation. A psychological assessment found the woman has difficulty functioning on a day-to-day basis and is highly suggestible. The judge deemed the confession inadmissible. In March 2023, the woman was allowed to withdraw her guilty plea after a judge says she wasn't fully informed of the consequences of the decision. The manslaughter trial resumes April 8th. Brittany Greenslade, CBC News, Winnipeg.
A Winnipeg woman is suing Uber Canada for damages after she says a driver sexually assaulted her. The woman alleges an Uber driver forcibly kissed her and tried to follow her inside her home in early December. Now, none of these allegations have been tested in court. An Uber Canada spokesperson says the company cannot comment on specific legal cases, but it says it does conduct police records and child abuse registry checks for its drivers, and that its app contains several safety features. The Winnipeg Humane Society hopes a new campaign will encourage people to turn in any lethal animal traps. It has launched the Trade in Your Trap campaign. People who bring in traps they have will be put in a draw for a $200 gift card. The Humane Society says it's seen 2 cases in the past several months of pets who've become unintended victims of these traps. That includes one cat who was severely injured in an illegal trap placed in a Winnipeg neighborhood. The Humane Society CEO says many animals get caught in traps that are long forgotten about after they've been placed. They will accept leg hold and body traps and snares for the trade. The province says a new minor injury clinic will open in Brandon in September. Premier Rob Canoe says the clinic is part of a $17 million plan to open similar clinics across Manitoba. The aim will be to reduce the demand on hospital emergency departments. The Brandon clinic will be staffed by doctors, nurse practitioners, and nurses. It will operate 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. Canoe hopes the clinic will not only help families in Westman, but also help recruit healthcare workers to the region.
You can come to Brandon, you can come to one of the nearby communities and work in a setting that is very meaningful for you, that uses the full scope of your skills and is beyond what you're going to be able to access in many other settings. And really the only place that somebody would have access to right now is in Winnipeg, the Minor Injury and Illness Clinic on Corridon. And we're saying, hey, folks in Brandon should have access to the same level of care too.
The New Democrats promised the clinic during last year's election campaign. They also promised to open clinics, hire more healthcare workers, and reduce wait times. Canoe says details on the other clinics will be released in next week's provincial budget. The Royal Manitoba Winter Fair is back in Brandon this week. Organizers say visitor numbers are on the rise, helping grow the Wheat City's economy. The group that runs the fair says a study found this event generates about $18 million for the local economy.
We are at the Royal Manitoba Winter Fair Brandon Keystone Centre. The attendance is already up today and yesterday. Oh, it's busy. Busy in town. Make sure you book ahead. The hotel rooms, we're told, are full up.
It's my first time horse showing here. It's very, very stressful because, you got to pack your own suitcase. You got to pack your horse's suitcase. You got to make sure they're in condition. You got to make sure everything's ready for her. And it's a lot of money. Probably in the thousands. This trip's probably going to cost me about 1.2, 1.3. You spend a lot of money on food.
Last time we did a study for ourselves, I think it was about an $18 million local economic bang for the buck. So if you think about how many hotels that fills, restaurants, shopping malls, if you look at this one event, how many, again, spin-offs this has made for this society. We have Summer Fair to follow, AgX, Ag Days is a friend of ours and partner. And then if you look, we've got the home show following shortly. So obviously one good key quality event starts to grow others, and that's the nature of the beast.
We love just that everybody brings their families out and we can see the producers behind the food that we eat, where our food comes from, and we can just celebrate farming. We might go for supper or eat here. There's a lot of great food trucks here and stuff. We might go out for supper as a family. We have family visiting from Winnipeg as well that are here. It's definitely good for Brandon.
It's just such a cool experience to be here. I've actually made a couple friends. I've made friends with the people that have that stallion over there, and honestly, it's been super, super fun.
You know what else is super fun? An Alberta Clipper. Riley Lachuk says there's one on the way.
Yes, we have details of an Easter weekend snowstorm, Janet. Yeah.
We don't need this when people want to travel.
I know. We'll get right into the details because there's a lot to talk about. I want to step back to yesterday because, yes, we did see a lot of snow and, yes, a lot of wind, but did not really amount to much in terms of accumulation through the day yesterday. So, 2 to 3 centimeters through the Polo Park downtown area, but just a trace in White Ridge. But it was enough snow to make things slick on highways, especially north of the city through the morning hours, even though Argyle only getting about a half a centimeter of snow, and really Portage La Prairie down through the Red River Valley not seeing much either. So goes to show that you don't need a lot of snow to slicken things up on highways if you had a little bit of wind in there. So satellite radar right now, mainly sunny this afternoon across both Saskatchewan and most of Manitoba. Still, though, into northwestern Ontario and northern Manitoba, seeing the effects of that Colorado low that pushed through earlier in the week. Things are changing, though, so that will move out as we get through the day on Thursday. The rest of southern Manitoba and much of northern Manitoba under a mainly sunny sky as we head through Thursday. So expect a bright day tomorrow. Winds not as strong as they were today or yesterday, that's for sure. But on the heels of that Colorado low moving out, we have, yes, this Alberta Clipper. West to east. So by the lunch hour on Friday, we do have snow through extreme southern Manitoba, even as far north as Swan River, the Pas, and Flin Flon as we get through the rest of the day on Friday. By about supper time, we're into the snow here in Winnipeg, and you can see here at 11:30 p.m. a lot of that snow starting to move out of Westman, and it's pretty much all done by the time we get to early Saturday morning. So yes, a quick mover. Could see another round of that with another weak disturbance moving through northern Alberta, impacting central Manitoba come late Saturday. In terms of accumulations, I think this particular model is overshooting it a bit. I've got Winnipeg and the Red River Valley in that 5 to 10 centimeter range. Could, though, especially along the international border, see some pockets of heavier accumulation and even up to about 10 centimeters or so through the Duck and Riding Mountains. So, yes, some snow on the way, not so much wind this time around. We have seen all that we will see in terms of wind as that really does lighten up as we get into the morning hours tomorrow. So -6 right now, northwest winds 30 gusting 50 with a rising pressure as we get through the night tonight. Looking at a mainly clear low of -12 degrees, waking up to about -10, mainly sunny skies, and into the afternoon above zero for the first time in a while at +1 tomorrow. Looking at temperatures above zero, Janet, as we get into the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and temperatures close to 10 degrees by mid next week, which I'll show you in your 7-day forecast.
Looking forward to it. Thank you, Riley.
You're welcome.
More on Canada's housing shortage coming up. The federal government says its upcoming budget will contain new measures to protect people who rent. Details after the break. The federal government says its upcoming budget will contain new measures to protect the rights of renters. But it's not clear how Ottawa will bring in these measures or when, since some of them will require the provinces to get on board. As Marina von Stackelberg tells us, today's announcement is an attempt to reach younger voters.
In one of the most expensive cities to rent in the country, a promise to help tenants from the Prime Minister.
The heart of this announcement is about making sure we're focused on fairness. Fairness for renters, fairness for young people, fairness for the future.
Ottawa will create a tenant protection fund, a small pot of money, $15 million, for legal aid organizations that fight for renters who are mistreated by their landlords. The federal government also wants first-time homebuyers to be able to use their history of paying rent on time toward their credit score. And there's a promise to create a renter bill of rights. That would require landlords to be more upfront by telling a potential new tenant what they've charged for a place in the past. Measures the federal government says will help the 2/3 of young Canadians who rent their home.
To the younger Canadians here with us today, and to all of you across our amazing country, I just want to say your concerns are real. You're not making it up. Your frustration is understandable. This isn't your fault, and it doesn't need to be your future.
Ministers fanned out across the country today to make the same announcement.
What we're here to do today is to talk a little bit about renters.
This is intentional. Gen Z and millennials have in the past been key to the Liberal government's election successes. But polls show younger Canadians are moving en masse to the Conservatives.
Among those that said they voted Liberal in the last election and would vote Conservative today, they are far more likely to say housing is a top issue.
Normally, the federal government's spending plans for the next year would be revealed in its spring budget. Instead, the Prime Minister said today to expect a series of announcements over the next 3 weeks. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
Members of diaspora communities appeared before a public inquiry in Ottawa today. They testified about how they believe foreign state actors have preyed upon them. The inquiry into foreign interference is investigating meddling in Canada's past 2 federal elections and whether that had an impact. CBC's Ashley Burke was there.
Like many in the Chinese
diaspora communities say they're the real victims of foreign interference and want this public inquiry to do something about it.
It touches your life. It touches your safety. It touches your security. It touches your family comfort. It touches your career. It touches your future. You don't get sleep.
They say they're being watched, followed, and intimidated by foreign proxies on Canadian soil, just for being critical of their home country's human rights records.
They collect information. They monitor your schedule, and they send that information to the public safety in China, and they coordinate together. And them in China reach out to your family members, and take hostage of your family members and force you to do something against your will here in Canada.
Their testimony unfolding at this inquiry investigating to what extent China, Russia, and other countries interfered in the past 2 federal elections, and if it had an impact.
The Commission must walk a very fine line.
The commissioner presiding over it says she already held 6 hearings behind closed doors. The evidence, she ruled, would have compromised national security, but wants this process to be as transparent as possible.
Some people will feel that too much information is being kept secret, while others may feel that too much information is being disclosed.
The inquiry started to dig into the threat by hearing from those directly impacted.
the community doesn't feel safe, and they're worried.
Diaspora groups describe community members being denied consular services by their home country, facing travel bans and even criminal charges abroad for protesting in Canada.
They
posted something on social media or engaged in some sort of activism against the Russian government, they have criminal charges laid against them, and then this becomes an additional obstacle when they attempt to gain citizenship. So it is a major threat.
The inquiry will hear from about 40 witnesses over the next 2 weeks, including those from intelligence agencies, political parties, and the Prime Minister himself. The first report is due in May. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
Canada's Electronic Intelligence Agency, CSE, says a hacking group linked to China has targeted Canada. It's the same group the UK and the US have accused of widespread cyber espionage. Those countries allege this group, known as APT-31, is an arm of China's Intelligence, Security and Secret Police Agency. The CSE says it's issued this statement to CBC News. The Cyber Center generally does not comment on specific cybersecurity incidents. However, we can confirm that we have seen malicious activity by this same threat actor targeting Canada. The CSE did not provide any further information about the time frame or any details of that malicious activity. U.S. federal safety investigators are now examining the voyage data recorder from the container ship that crashed into a Baltimore bridge. 6 people are presumed dead after yesterday's collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. A human tragedy, completely. But the loss of that bridge is also a major economic concern. The port is an important link in the North American supply chain. CBC's Chris Reyes is in Baltimore and brings us the latest.
One day after this stunning collapse, divers are back in the water, this time with one mission only: to recover the bodies of 6 construction crew members who plunged into the frigid Patapsco River when a massive cargo ship hit a support beam on the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore.
With the expected rain, the choppy waters, and we all know about the debris and other things that they'll be dealing with. So we also have to lift those first responders up who are putting their own lives at risk to be able to bring home those who we lost, to have some sort of closure for those families.
2 of the victims who have been identified, Maynor Yasir Suazo Sandoval, a married father of 2 from Honduras, and Miguel Luna from El Salvador, also married with 3 children. Both have lived in the U.S. for more than 18 years. Maryland's governor has been meeting with families of the victims. He says they remain his top priority.
It was heartbreaking. These are families who at that time we had a search and rescue mission going, and I told them we would deploy every asset to try to find survivors. And the promise that I make to them now is that we're going to give every asset to bring a measure of closure to them in this recovery phase.
A huge part of that closure will come from the official investigation into the crash led by the National Transportation Safety Board. They've recovered the ship's black box, which could contain a lot of answers.
Everything from positioning of ship, of the vessel itself, to speed, you name it. We hope to have that information to begin to pull together a timeline of events before the striking of the bridge.
The Biden administration says it's ready to put up the funds to get it done, no matter the expense and the time it will take, underscoring the port's massive economic importance.
The NTSB, working with multiple agencies, has a large team on the ground. They'll continue to examine the Singapore flag vessel, question the crew members who are still on board and any other witnesses who may have been around at the time of the collision. A preliminary report is expected in 2 to 4 weeks. Chris Reyes, CBC News, Dundalk, Maryland.
The RCMP gave an update today on what it has done to improve procedures following the worst mass shooting in Canadian history. A gunman in Nova Scotia went on a shooting rampage on April 2020 that lasted throughout the night and the morning. A year ago, Commission released its recommendations. The CBC's Nicolas Seguin reports on what the Mounties said today.
And if we don't change, we're going to lose the trust of the Canadian public.
The RCMP is pleading with Canadians to believe it can change. Last March, the public inquiry into the worst mass shooting in Canadian history issued a 3,000-page report. More than half of its 130 recommendations took aim at the Mounties and policing culture. The RCMP says it's concentrating on 33 under its direct control, but admitted today that so far only 10 have been completed, including expanding the use of the cell phone emergency alert system across Canada and adopting a system to track police officers in real time.
I'm pleased with the progress we've made so far, but we are by no means done.
But it wasn't just a progress report. They also admitted to mistakes and apologized for what happened 4 years ago when a gunman disguised as a police officer killed 22 people across Nova Scotia.
The role of the police is making sure the community and its citizens are safe. And on that particular day, faced with extenuating circumstances, we weren't able to do that, and I'm sorry for that.
For me, part of that taking responsibility is doing better.
But for the people closest to the tragedy, it's too little, too late.
I think they still need to go way further in their apologies.
During the rampage, 2 RCMP officers shot at a fire hall, thinking they saw the gunman. Curry and others hid for an hour, thinking the actual shooter was outside. They say years later, the trauma isn't resolved.
The RCMP have no idea, I don't believe, what they've done to the community.
At the same time, some of the victims' families aren't sure what progress they're supposed to be witnessing.
There's a lot of vagueness and ambiguity when it comes to, well, what changes have been made.
The RCMP says deep-rooted change will take time, so now Canadians wait to see if it happens fast enough. Nicola Sagan, CBC News, Halifax.
Saskatchewan's Premier Scott Moe spoke to a parliamentary committee today about the impending hike to the federal carbon tax. The price per ton of carbon is to rise by 23% on April 1st. Moe is one of several premiers calling for the carbon tax to be ended altogether. Manitoba's premier is not part of that group. Moe says the gas tax, or rather the carbon tax, forgive me, my mistake, the carbon tax is making industries less competitive and life for citizens less affordable.
When the latest consumer price index came out, Saskatchewan today is at 1.7%, down under the 2% projected target that the Bank of Canada had hit, 1 full point lower than the Canadian average. And Statistics Canada had said specifically that was due to a decision that the Saskatchewan government made to remove the carbon tax from home heating. And so you can imagine what would happen to our CPI nationwide if we were to pause, first of all, and then remove the consumer carbon tax on Canadians.
Moe was invited to appear before the parliamentary committee by Conservative MPs. He did receive pushback from Liberal, NDP and Bloc Québécois MPs to explain what he would do instead to cut emissions. An expensive watch gone after a sneaky sleight of hand. After the break, we'll show you how a Quebec man was left holding an envelope of flyer clippings instead of cash. Stay with us. Magicians' tricks are usually amusing, but apparently they're not always. One man recently lost an expensive watch thanks to sleight of hand. He thought he'd been handed an envelope full of money in exchange for the Rolex he was selling. But the envelope was actually stuffed with flyer clippings. Corbina Oduro has more from Montreal.
Moi, j'avais la 126, 116.
Laurent Mattel has been flipping Rolex watches for the past 10 years. He doesn't like to make sales in public, preferring to meet people at his home, which is equipped with cameras.
I asked him to come over here because I have a camera, so I'm protecting myself this way. And that was good because I have this guy on camera. So this is how I prefer to deal. But unfortunately, this guy was a magician.
In November, when he sold a watch for $15,000, the buyer arrived wearing a baseball cap and a medical mask. But Mattel says his polite manner reassured him.
You can see this magic pocket is right here.
The man was carrying a black pouch. He took an envelope of money out, removed an elastic, and gave it to Mattel, who counted the money before the man put it back in the envelope.
He left. I put the money in my desk, and 1 hour after, I just went in the envelope to open it and put the money somewhere else. This is how I realized I was the victims.
Magician John Vincelli demonstrates how easily the switch could happen.
And let me just give you the elastic.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Did I leave it in the bag? No, here it is, under the bag. All right, here you go.
Thank you very much.
No problem. I literally just did this. Came back out, no, it's not there, and oh, it's under the bag.
But is it a theft or a fraud? After initially approving his claim, Mattel's insurance company later disputed it, arguing he had handed over the watch willingly. Eventually, Mattel did receive $10,000 compensation. He says he's heard from others on Facebook who believe they have been duped by the same trickster.
I'm still upset about what happened to me because I know the thief is still on the road.
Mattel is hoping to get his Rolex back, but he says he's learned a lesson. From now on, he'll only do transactions in a safe zone outside a local police station. Corbina Oduro, CBC News, Blainville, Quebec.
That is a good idea. A new study is linking global warming to Earth's rotation and even impacting how we measure time. Researchers found that the melting of polar ice has caused the Earth to spin more slowly than it otherwise would. They say this is because as ice at the poles melts, it changes where mass is concentrated. Less solid ice at the ends of the Earth throws off the balance with the mass near the equator. This also means the world's clocks need to be adjusted by a leap second, which could have an impact on computing systems. But the study says exactly when this could all happen relies on global warming. Riley joins us once again with a look at our Manitoba forecast.
With another furry friend
yes,
to show you.
Our dog walking segment.
Yes, so let's get right into it. It's going to be a pretty nice afternoon to walk the dog tomorrow. Maybe not so much in the morning, but I have a feeling that Dexter really does like the snow, looking very handsome against that white snow. Thank you, Brian and family, for sending that one in. Talkback at cbc.ca is where you can send your photos to. I'd love to see them. So tomorrow, yes, looking at a start at -10, +1 by the time we hit the afternoon. So 5 green paws tomorrow. Maybe not the same story as we head into the day on Friday. Here's where we got to today, -6, exactly where my forecast high was for today. In Winnipeg, a bit warmer to the south and to the west with -3s to both Dauphin and Swan River. Churchill getting to a high of -10. So around the region right now, -6 in St. Laurent, -4 in Eli, as well as in Gimli, Victoria Beach at -7 and -3 in Morris, -5 in both Selkirk and at the Forks. -2 still in Morden Winkler, as well as in Melita. Roblins at -7, Swan River -3, and -3s as well for Flin Flon the Pas. -9 into Dooley Lake. So yes, below seasonal, but we do have a return, as I showed you earlier, to a little bit more seasonal conditions as we get into the 7-day forecast. So tonight, looking at temps around -15 to -20 in southwestern Manitoba, more like -11s and -12s to the east and into northwestern Ontario, -16s, -18s for Flin Flon, the Pas, -16 in Grand Rapids, -14 in Gillam. So looking at your hour by hour for tomorrow, we're looking at mainly sunny skies as we get through the day on Thursday. By noon, bright sunshine across most of northern Manitoba. Still some wind and some snow along the Hudson Bay coast. That does taper off as we get later into the afternoon, almost to the freezing mark in parts of north central Manitoba tomorrow. Waking up around -15, -20 in the southwest by the time we hit noon. Sunshine all around for the most part, -3s in Melita and Killarney by noon. Looking at a high of +1 in Winnipeg in the afternoon tomorrow, and looking at -1s and -2s to the Parkland region. A little bit of cloud still hanging around into northwestern Ontario, Janet, but we do have a mix of sun and clouds in Kenora, -1, and Victoria Beach looking at a sunny -4 tomorrow. Your 7 days on the way.
Looking forward to it. Thank you, Riley.
You're welcome.
A young American woman has accomplished the feat of a lifetime. Lexi Alford became the first person to circumnavigate the globe in an all-electric vehicle.
Driving more than 30,000 kilometers on 6 continents and through 27 countries was such a unique experience. So much diversity.
Look at all that Ford advertising. You see, Alford finished her trek in France after driving across 6 continents in an electric Ford Explorer. During her 6-month journey, she contended with freezing temperatures, power outages in Africa, and a lack of charging infrastructure in a Chilean desert. She had to use alternative charging solutions, such as direct current fast chargers, household outlets, solar panels, and portable battery packs. She says she hopes her journey will encourage other people to drive electric vehicles. Researchers at the University of Manitoba are digging for answers, wondering how what you choose to eat impacts the microorganisms in your gut, and how that in turn might trigger mental health issues. Dr. Charles Bernstein explains after the break. You likely know the old saying, you are what you eat. As a CBC science writer once explained, the trillions of bacteria inhabiting your gut also eat what you eat. They turn meals into molecules that affect your brain and therefore your mood. Tonight, a panel of researchers at the University of Manitoba, including enterologist Dr. Charles Bernstein and clinical psychologist Dr. Leslie Graff, will share their latest findings. I spoke with Dr. Charles Bernstein this afternoon to learn more.
There are different gut-related syndromes, collections of symptoms that either may make up something called irritable bowel syndrome or other diseases called inflammatory bowel disease, either Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. And we've come to learn that not only might mental health disorders like depression or anxiety impact on the course of these conditions, but they may antedate these conditions by so many years to make us wonder whether they have unifying causes that...
Forgive me, antedate. Are you saying these two could be linked, that perhaps one caused the other?
Correct. That what I mean by antedate is that the depression and anxiety is diagnosed for some years before the inflammatory bowel disease, not necessarily just diagnosed in response to having been diagnosed with a chronic condition. And so we don't understand very well the biology of depression and anxiety. And it makes us wonder whether they also may be immune diseases or inflammatory diseases, and therefore the link with ultimately developing an inflammatory disease of your gut.
So let's talk about how this could change treatments. There is a study I noticed when I went to the clinic you founded 30 years ago, the IBD Clinical and Research Center at the University of Manitoba, is looking for people who have inflammatory bowel disease and also might be anxious, might have depression. You're testing your theory. Can we get immediately to how food might impact people's health?
Well, with the food that we eat, what we ingest, and I fully agree and like your introduction that we probably are what we eat in many ways. It impacts on the bugs that are present in our bowel, and the bugs that are present in our bowel impact on our gut's immune system. The gut is the largest lymph node in the body. It has an enormous immune reaction to whatever we take in. And some of those immune mediators can travel up to the brain and impact the way our brain is functioning, whether it makes us feel tired, whether it alters our mood. And so we're just learning what foodstuffs may impact on what bugs and may in turn trigger inflammatory bowel disease, but also either separately or together trigger something like depression or an anxiety disorder. The study you're alluding to on our website is trying to provide patients with inflammatory bowel disease care for their mood disorders and a way to deal with their stress. And since there aren't enough clinical psychologists in Manitoba or even in the world to be able to provide care for everyone who needs it from a mental health perspective, we're testing an approach using internet-based cognitive behavioral therapy. What that means is cognitive behavioral therapy is an approach to getting people therapy for their stress or their anxiety. And rather than meeting with a psychologist one-on-one, which is labor-intensive for the manpower, we've created an internet-based cognitive behavioral therapy program. And patients can access this and run through potentially the 10 weeks of the program. And we hope that that will provide greater benefit for their mental health and maybe also their inflammatory bowel disease than what they're maybe doing now, which may be nothing.
Dr. Charles Bernstein, thank you for your time today.
My pleasure.
Your 7-day forecast and daily lift are still to come.
Looking at your day planner for your Thursday, we're expecting a nice sunny day again tomorrow. Really province-wide with the exception of the Hudson Bay coast. So -10 first thing in the morning. Light winds -5 by noon, and yes, up to +1 by the afternoon tomorrow, just about at that seasonal high of +4 for this time of the year. Snow begins through the later part of Friday into Saturday, 5 to 10 centimeters generally across southern Manitoba, tapering off to a more sunny sky as we head through the day on Saturday, and then temperatures really shoot up from there. Mainly sunny skies through Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and up to 9 degrees on Wednesday with a chance of showers. Well, Janet, some people think Easter eggs are for the birds, but at a zoo in Germany, they're for the bears.
Here's your daily lift. This would be one of the bears in question. In case you're wondering, that egg is actually filled with fruit and nuts. It was just one of many activities the zookeepers have been introducing to keep their animals busy. Some of the bear's neighbors, the monkeys and a mongoose, weren't quite as lucky. They had to settle for regular chicken eggs, though they were painted in a variety of colors.
A lot better than getting a potato for Easter, I guess.
Well, would be. Did that ever happen to you? Do we need therapy? No, you can talk to me, Riley. You can. I'm sure your parents aren't watching.
I don't think they are.
Come on, you know, the eggs. Well, a potato. My dad was from PEI. It was very likely I might have had a potato for Easter.
Well, there
what do you
go.
want for nothing?
Can't win every year.
You can't. Thank you for being with us. See you tomorrow.
See ya.